Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is chutzpah, just plain chutzpah. Egypt is suing Israel for compensation for their 1,000 shares of their part ownership of the world-famous and luxurious hotel called the King David in Jerusalem. The Egyptians hired 2 Israeli lawyers and have already submitted their claim in Jerusalem District Court for 10 million Israeli shekels. This is a massive mistake on the part of Egypt, and not just because they're suing for what, in the world of hotel lawsuits, is a paltry sum. They are opening up a can of very ugly worms, because if Egypt sues Israel, then Israel will countersue Egypt. This may be the extent of Egypt's claim for compensation, while the Jewish communal and private compensation from Egypt and the rest of the Arab world is estimated to be $30 billion and could be as much as $100 billion. From the time the Jewish state was created in 1948 through the mid-1960s, approximately 1 million Jews sought refuge after escaping from Arab states and Iran. The Jews who were exiled and forced out of their homes in the Arab world and in Iran escaped to Israel. And in most cases, their property was nationalized even before they left. That means that there is a direct link from those events when the Arab states confiscated Jewish private property and communal property, which included businesses and bank accounts, and the Arab states today. If Egypt sues the Jews of Israel that came from Arab lands, it is only a matter of time before Israel and Israelis countersue back. This is not the first time Egypt has brought a suit over Jerusalem's King David Hotel to the Israeli court system. Let's say last time it happened, their Israeli lawyer defrauded the Egyptians over $2.6 million, claiming that that was the cost of filing the suit. And in 2013, that Israeli lawyer was actually convicted of fraud and sentenced to 3 years in prison because of that. While in reality, you should note, the filing cost was actually $258. Here we go again. The new Egyptian angle this time is that it is the Bank Misra. Bank Misra is the national Egyptian bank, the National Bank of Egypt, that's suing Israel. The bank was nationalized by Nasser in the early 1960s. The bank has 500 branches throughout Egypt and the rest of the Arab world. Bank Misra has a holding of about $218 billion. So adding more chutzpah to an already chutzpah-laden situation is that 1,000 shares of the King David Hotel that Egypt had through their Bank Misra as a proxy is actually suing over, is not really theirs in the first place. And this is the weird part, because the most original shares didn't belong to them. It belonged to a Jewish bank that had branches throughout the Middle East and in Egypt, and it was headquartered in Lebanon. It was called Bank Zilka. The bank was named for its Jewish founder and owner, Kedori Zilka. And then, like every other bank in Egypt, in the 1960s, Bank Zilka was nationalized. That's why the National Egyptian Bank is suing. The investor and the builder of the King David was a Jewish Egyptian named Ezra Musari. He was a very successful Egyptian Jew who founded a group called the Palestine Hotels Limited, specifically in order to build the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. The hotel was opened in 1929, has since become the premier hotel in all of Israel, let alone in Jerusalem, for heads of state, diplomats, personalities of renown. Musari was also the director and the president of Bank Misra, but he used only 4% of that bank's money to build the hotel. He, along with several of his Jewish friends, paid 96% of the cost out of their pocket. Among the friends was the father-in-law of Abba Eban, who later served as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations and the United States, and Chaim Herzog, who became president of Israel. You should note those two people were married to sisters, Egyptian sisters. With this new suit, It is unclear if Egypt is suing for the 1,000 shares which belonged to Bank Zilka, the private Jewish bank that was nationalized, or the 693 shares that came from Bank Misra. Egypt is not the only country that will end up losing money if they do this, and a lot of money, because in the end, it's a big suit. Libya will lose, Tunisia will lose, Morocco will lose, Lebanon will lose, Syria, Iraq, and Iran all stand to lose as well, because they all had enormously wealthy Jewish communities that were exiled and whose property was governmentally confiscated. When Israel and Egypt signed their Camp David Accords in 1978, they finalized peace between the two countries. Compensation was set up in order to deliver an equitable sum to those Jews who were forced to leave, which would cover their losses of their families and the community property. This is laid out in Article 8 of the treaty, the Camp David Treaty. A compensation committee was supposed to be established to facilitate this whole mechanism. The committee was never created, and so no compensation was ever given by Egypt to Egyptian Jews who were forced out of their homes and had their property confiscated and were exiled from their country into Israel. Egypt and Israel have, over the past year, worked very closely and very well together on the diplomatic, economic, and security projects and issues. Whoever advised the government of Egypt and the Bank of Misra to pursue this line of legal confrontation made a serious political and economic error. This segues perfectly into an understanding of Jewish extremism and Jewish terror. Why? Because the King David was, as most of you know from your studies and from your history, was the target of Jewish terror. It was a target of Jewish terror attack, no doubt about it. During the British Mandate, the hotel was transformed into the British military and administrative headquarters. On July 22nd, 1946, the southwestern corner of the hotel was bombed. At that point, during the attack, the Irgun killed 91 people. 45 were injured. An earlier attempt to attack the hotel by the Irgun was actually foiled by the Haganah, who learned about it and warned the British authorities in advance. In the 1930s and 40s, many deposed leaders from around the world lived in the King David Hotel. On May 4th, 1948, the British flag was lowered from the King David. The building then became a Jewish stronghold. At the end of the 1948 war, the Arab-Israeli War, the hotel found itself overlooking no man's land on the armistice line. It was the border between Jordan and Israel. Jerusalem was divided right down the middle. It was purchased then by the Dan Hotel chain in 1958. The film Exodus was shot at the hotel in 1960. When East Jerusalem was annexed by Israel following the 1967 war, the Six-Day War, the hotel was expanded and 2 additional floors were established there. There's been a recent increase in Jewish terror over the past few months, and that has been followed by an increase in Palestinian terror in response to the Jewish terror. Israel is whirling from the terrible violence Jews have been perpetrating in the name of religion. A Jewish jihadi movement has emerged, and it's very upsetting. The latest victim is a 16-year-old Shira Banki, a high school student, marching in the Gay Pride Parade in Jerusalem. After having been savagely and brutally stabbed in public, in front of the cameras and in front of the police, Shira succumbed to her wounds. The murderer had just been released from prison a month before the stabbing, after serving 10 years of a 15-year sentence for doing what? For attacking people at a gay pride parade in Jerusalem 10 years ago. This attack and many other attacks by Jews could and should have been prevented. Israel needs to lower the evidence bar when it comes to cases of Jewish jihad. There must be administrative detention for Jews engaged in acts of terror or violence, just as there is for Palestinians. This means that when there is not enough evidence to convict, police must detain suspects because of the greater risk. Now that they are finally applying administrative detentions again, Israel used this idea before, just after the Rabin assassination. It is essential. Rabbis who incite and justify violence must also be arrested, charged and tried for incitement. Curricula in schools must be created to teach about the differences and tolerance, and courts and leaders must give stringent penalties to Jewish jihadis. There are those who want to murder people just because they're different and because they believe themselves to have high moral ground and to have Jewish arguments to prove their case. It's wrong. Putting this into perspective, one has to realize there are not many of these Jewish jihadis, perhaps 100 or 200. There aren't many at all, but they must be publicly condemned by both political and religious Jewish leadership in Israel and abroad. Coming up next, Points of View. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is a column by Natan Sharansky. It's dated July 28, 2015, and entitled, How Obama's Iran Deal is Putting Jews in a Bind. Anything Sharansky writes is worth reading. He's a very clear and exceptional analyst. Some background on Sharansky. Sharansky is a hero. He was a refusenik in the former Soviet Union. In 1973, he applied for a visa to leave the USSR and live in Israel. It was denied. He then became the translator and spokesman for Dmitry Sakharov and spokesman for the Moscow-Helsinki group. On March 15, 1977, he was arrested for high treason and spying and sentenced to the Gulag. His charge was giving a list of refuseniks to a Western journalist. Anatoly Sharansky, as he was then called, was released on February 11, 1986. He was part of a spy exchange and the first prisoner to be released by Mikhail Gorbachev. It was the Israeli ambassador to Germany who suggested his name change to Natan after he crossed at Checkpoint Charlie. He came to Israel as a hero and got involved in politics. He informed political parties. He created political parties. He has been a member of Knesset and a minister, and now he's head of the Jewish Agency. This essay shows how the Iran deal is dividing the Jewish community. Here's how he begins. Quote, these days, like many Israelis and American Jews, I find myself in a precarious and painful situation. Those of us who believe that the nuclear agreement just signed between the world powers and Iran is dangerously misguided are now compelled to criticize Israel's best friend and ally, the government of the United States. In standing up for what we think is right, for both our people and the world, we find ourselves at odds with the power best able to protect us and promote stability. And instead of joining the hopeful chorus of those who believe peace is on the horizon, we must risk giving the impression that we somehow prefer war. Sharansky then draws a parallel between what is happening now and what happened during the fight to free Soviet Jewry. How that, too, put Jews in a bind. Sharansky says that Senator Henry Scoop Jackson and Senator Jacob Javits were bold enough to stand up against President Nixon and fight for Soviet Jews, even though Nixon was saying politics was more important than Jewish lives. These senators garnered support and had the presence of mind and the strength to challenge Nixon, and they tied human rights of Jews in Russia to favored economic trade deals with Russia. Then Sharansky concludes, quote, today, an American president has once again sought to achieve stability by removing sanctions against a brutal dictatorship without demanding that the latter change its behavior. And once again, a group of outspoken Jews, no longer a small group of dissidents in Moscow, but leaders of the state of Israel from the governing coalition and the opposition alike, are sounding an alarm. Of course, we're reluctant to criticize our ally and to so vigorously oppose an agreement that purports to promote peace, but we know we're again at a historic crossroads, and that the United States can either appease a criminal regime, one that supports global terror, relentlessly threatens to eliminate Israel, and executes more political prisoners than any other per capita, or stand firm in demanding change in its behavior. A critical question is, who, if anyone, will have the vision and courage to be the next Senators Jackson and Javits? Unfortunately, Sharansky is probably correct. The next is an editorial from the New York Post. The piece appeared on July 26th in the print edition and July 25th in the online edition. Remember, the editorial is by the editorial board and is unsigned. This one is entitled, When a Morally Bankrupt UN Blesses a Hamas-Linked Group. This is how the New York Post editorial begins. Hamas just gained a foothold at the United Nations, and about the only consolation is that the vote was surprisingly close. That's unusual for the world body, where the third world majority and many of its Western allies normally march in lockstep, especially when it comes to opposing Israel. But the bottom line is that the London-based Palestine Return Center has just won accreditation as a non-governmental organization by a vote of 16-13, with 18 abstentions, of the UN's Economic and Social Council. That gives the PRC full access to the UN facilities and the right to participate in its committee hearings, including the obsessively anti-Israel Human Rights Council. Israel led the opposition to the group's approval, and Washington also voted no, saying it had, quote, serious concerns, unquote, about the group's background and activities. I need to explain something here, that this move by the UN to accept Hamas, an affiliate of Hamas, is bone-chilling. It seems clear that the UN just handed over international status to a Hamas group. They now have full access to the international community of diplomats and can now lobby and even submit policy papers. The New York Post piece concludes with a damning critique and an unbelievable proof of just how bad the decision was by the UN. Quote, "We remain more swayed by the evidence. It's telling that immediately after the vote, the PRC leader Majid al-Zir, a longtime Hamas activist, publicly thanked Iran and Sudan, whose leader is wanted for genocide for their efforts. How much more proof of the UN's moral bankruptcy is needed before its supporters stop looking through rose-colored glasses?" Wow. Coming up next, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. The first cartoon is by Nate Beeler. Nate Beeler is an award-winning editorial cartoonist for The Dispatch. He has earned the reputation of being both a top-flight artist and a first-rate journalist. Formerly the cartoonist for the Washington Examiner, he won the 2009 Thomas Nast Award from the Overseas Press Club and 2008 Berryman Award from the National Press Foundation, among many other awards. Beeler is a native of Bexley and earned a journalism degree at American University in Washington. His cartoons have appeared in such publications as Time Magazine, Newsweek, USA Today, etc. This cartoon is insightful and is so truthful. It's entitled Moment of Zen. A person is sitting in a dark room. The TV is dark. Everything is dark. In his hand is a newspaper. The headline reads, "Jon Stewart leaves Daily Show." The bubble has the man asking, quote, "Now where will I get my news?" This is the reality. So many people get their news and got their news from The Daily Show and from the comedy shows on late-night TV. Far more people, especially the younger generation, watch them than actually watch primetime news broadcasts. The younger generation gets their news from the web and from the comedy shows. Stewart will be missed, especially by those who rely on him for the real dope. Here's an example of what made Jon Stewart so funny and so on target. This is a piece about what happens when you criticize Israel.
In fact, we'll start tonight in the Middle East, where Israel...
What? Israel isn't supposed to defend itself?
Oh, yeah, if Mexico bombed Texas, will we exercise
What other country held to the same standard as Israel? People that want to destroy our terrorists?
4,000-year claim.
It's the only democracy in the Middle East, you claim!
Self-hating Jew?
That was weird. Anyway, what I was saying was last Thursday saw the start of a new ground offensive launched by Israel.
Oh,
Tradition! Tradition!
Holy look, obviously there are many strong opinions on this issue, but just merely mentioning Israel or questioning in any way the effectiveness or humanity of Israel's policies is not the same thing as being pro-Hamas.
So you're against murdered children?
Free Gaza! Free Palestine!
The Zionist pig!
You know what? Why don't we just talk about something lighter, like Ukraine?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
The next cartoon is by Gary Varvel. We've talked about Varvel before. He's brilliant. The cartoon is called The Iran Deal. Carrie is playing a board game sitting across the table from the Grand Ayatollah Khamenei. The Ayatollah is playing chess, and Carrie is playing checkers. Carrie is saying, we've got him right where we want him. Of course, the humor here is that they're playing completely different games with completely different rules, completely different levels of sophistication. And this is one of the most realistic and appropriate metaphors. I use it all the time. It's one that I borrow from Sharansky, actually, who once told me in an answer to the question of how he makes sense of this mess with Iran, he said, and I'm quoting Sharansky here, they are playing with us chess and we are playing with them checkers. The third cartoon is by Drew Shanneman. It's published in the Tribune Content Agency, and the cartoon depicts Obama with the Grand Ayatollah. They're shaking hands, and the Ayatollah is saying, this historic agreement begins a new era of cooperation with the great Satan, upon whom we wish a most fiery death. Sorry, old habits. The caption is profound. It says what every skeptic has said in one sentence and in humor. Iran is still shouting death to America despite the deal. So are we left asking, is it the old habits or true feeling on Iran's part? In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. In Iran today, there is a substantial and significant opposition to the deal. The opposition comes from hardliners and the Iranian president, and from others. It also comes from the elite Revolutionary Guard. The Guard controls much of the industry in Iran and owns an interest in almost every walk of the Iranian economy, from the oil to the gas to the real estate markets, almost everything. The head of the Revolutionary Guard is a man by the name of General Muhammad Ali Jafari. He has publicly renounced the agreement. He says that the agreement will weaken Iran's military power and put them at a strategic disadvantage. It should be noted that there are also Iranian leaders who have embraced the agreement. Iran has decided to mirror the United States. The Iranian parliament will engage in the debate and then vote to either accept or reject the agreement. But in the end, the debate will take place, but the real decision is in the hands of the supreme leader, who will ultimately decide. As of this moment, it's not clear that the supreme leader will accept the agreement at all. Why might the supreme leader decide against the agreement? There are many possible reasons, but one true answer is that Iran wants even more from the agreement. I would call that chutzpah. On another topic, until now, it was the United States, Canada, and France, but now it's also Brazil. Brazil announced that they too will not add the word Israel on the passports of citizens born in Jerusalem. This is the exact same issue that the United States Supreme Court ruled on several months ago when it decided that it is the president who determines foreign policy. And so, for U.S. citizens born in Jerusalem, their passports do not say Israel. Now, Brazil has joined the ranks of the U.S., Canada, and France. These are countries that do not add Israel as the name of the country after Jerusalem. The name of the city on the passports is there, but citizens born in the capital city of Israel is not mentioned. The logic behind this should be clear. In the eyes of the leadership of these countries, Jerusalem is in dispute. Not just part of Jerusalem, as in East Jerusalem, or what some call Arab Jerusalem, but all of Jerusalem is in dispute. This is the same reason why countries do not recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and instead locate their embassies in Tel Aviv. This is the entire episode, which is indicative of the attitude of the world towards Israel, not just after 1967, but Israel since its inception in 1948. Leaders and nations have always and still continue to question the very existence of the State of Israel. I can't leave without talking about Iran's new international role. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif traveled to Moscow to meet with Russian leaders. The visit was announced on TASS Media, which is an official media outlet of the Russians. Interestingly, the outlet quoted the Iranian embassy in Moscow as its source. It was a news source that, exactly like that one, that announced recently that the Iranian general Soleimani actually visited Russia despite UN travel bans. Soleimani is the head of the Iranian Al-Quds force and is responsible for the death of hundreds of Americans. He is banned from international travel. And yet, these two examples of Iranian leaders going to Moscow illustrate an essential point. Iran and Russia are positioning themselves as players on the world stage. Sending Soleimani to Russia and having the Russians not only receive him, but also publicly announce the visit is an intentional move by the Iranians and the Russians aimed at flaunting international law and UN decisions. Remember, this was all done after the Iranian deal was announced. By sending Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif to Moscow, it shows us again that Russia and Iran are plotting and planning to conduct themselves and their serious negotiations independent of the United States. Ultimately, their goal is to position themselves as world leaders who can propose solutions for many problems. They want to unseat America's role in the international arena. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquant piece of information. Did you know that the word hotel comes from the French? It means a building that many people enter into. The word motel is a combination of motor car and hotel together. The motel is a hotel where cars drive right up to the guest's room. In Hebrew, the word for hotel is malon. Malon comes from the word lalun, which means to spend one night, a single night in a place. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.